I was standing by the clear, still ponds of Oshino Hakkai last week, a place usually so crowded with tourists you can barely see the water. But the silence was deafening. Where dozens of massive tour buses usually idle, there were only two. A shopkeeper nearby was staring at a display of strawberries that hadn't moved in days. "It's like the air just got sucked out of the room," she told me. When I asked if it was just a bad season, she shook her head and pointed toward the news playing on a small TV behind the counter. "It's the talk of war," she whispered. "It's the Pandora's box they keep mentioning. That box is currently being pried open in Tokyo. Following a crushing election victory, the administration is no longer just talking about defense. They are preparing for a can-fight reality. We are seeing a Japan that is rapidly trading its post-war pacifism for 65,000-ton aircraft carriers, counter-strike capabilities, and a push to rewrite a constitution that has stood untouched for 80 years. What's striking is the sheer speed of this rightward shift. To the government, it's a rational response to a survival crisis and regional threats. But look closer at the data, and you'll see a society caught in a bizarre contradiction. While the halls of power are filled with excitement over nuclear sharing and emergency clauses, the streets of tourist towns are feeling the immediate cold sting of diplomatic retaliation. Chinese tourism has cratered, bookings are being canceled by the thousands, and the explosive buying era has vanished into thin air. Is Japan securing its future by becoming a military heavyweight once again, or is it repeating the historical patterns of the 1930s, fueling nationalistic fervor while alienating its neighbors? Today, we're looking at the hidden mechanics behind Japan's speeding right-wing shift and the structural tremors it's sending through the rest of the world.
It's a profound moment. I mean, what we're witnessing here is a fundamental rewriting of the East Asian security architecture, and it's happening in real time.
It really is.
And to be clear, right from the start, this isn't just about one politician, or one election cycle. This is a systemic shift that has been bubbling under the surface for a decade, maybe more.
And now the cork is finally popped.
Yes.
Exactly. And to really get a handle on this, because it is huge and frankly a bit terrifying if you look at the raw numbers, we've organized our deep dive today into 3 distinct layers. We really need to unpack this whole mission of the Takaichi administration, sort of layer by layer, to see what's actually happening beneath all the rhetoric.
Right. We have 3 main pillars to get through. So first, we've got the hardware.
The hardware.
Yeah, this is the physical stuff, the manufacturing of a war machine. We're talking missiles, ships, the industry itself. It's the steel and the silicon.
Okay, and after the hardware?
Then we have the software. This is the legal battle, the fight for, well, you could say the soul of the nation, effectively. This is the big push to change the Constitution, specifically that famous Article 9.
The legal operating system, basically.
And finally, we have to look at the cost. This is the immediate economic price tag that's being paid right now on the streets of places like Osaka and Kyoto. It's the very real trade-off between security and prosperity.
Okay, so let's start with the hardware. I want to ground this in reality because we throw around terms like militarization or defense budgets, and people's eyes tend to glaze over. Yeah. But this shift has a very, very physical presence.
It does.
I want to share a story about an engineer named Sato. He spent 3 decades at a heavy industries plant in Nagasaki. For years, his daily pride was the precision welding of massive commercial LNG carriers, liquid natural gas ships destined for global trade. These are peaceful giants, just moving energy around the world. However, recent reports describe how the atmosphere in his facility has completely shifted. Sato's blueprints have changed. The sleek lines of merchant ships are being replaced by the jagged, stealth-oriented hulls of new destroyers. The rhythmic clang of the shipyard now serves a different master: the Takaichi government's mandate to double missile production rates. I can imagine Sato standing amidst the sparks of the welding torch, realizing that his hands, which once built the infrastructure of global commerce, are now the primary engines of Japan's defense industrial base. There is a newfound somber intensity on the factory floor, a physical manifestation of a nation pivoting from a peace state to a military power in real time. Reading about Sato makes the abstract data of naval shipbuilding throughput feel uncomfortably real. I see this as the hard power metric that defines our era. While the government frames this as a necessary evolution for national security, the sheer speed of this industrial mobilization is a direct challenge to the regional balance. We are witnessing the conversion of economic muscle into kinetic potential. And though one can understand the desire for self-reliance in a volatile world, the physical reality of these missile stockpiles creates a momentum that is often harder to stop than it was to start.
That image of Sato is so crucial because it perfectly illustrates the scale of what we call the defense industrial base mobilization. For decades, these huge Japanese companies like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, they were almost incredibly shy about their defense contracts.
Right, they didn't want to be seen as merchants of death.
Exactly. Not in a country with a pacifist constitution. It was almost like a dirty secret.
Yeah, like, we make amazing air conditioners and elevators, and oh, by the way, we also make a tank on the side.
The defense revenue was usually capped, or at least kept very quiet, often kept under 20% of their total portfolio. But that taboo is just gone. The Takaichi administration has effectively taken the gloves off.
So it's out in the open now.
Completely. We're seeing Mitsubishi Electric openly targeting $3.9 billion in defense revenue by 2030. And they're actively benchmarking against South Korea's recent success in selling arms to, say, Poland. Japan wants to be a major arms exporter now.
Wow. But let's look at what they're actually building. The Defense Ministry calls it the fundamental reinforcement of defense capabilities, which, sounds like bureaucratic word salad.
Yes.
But they break it down into these 7 pillars. Is this just upgrading old gear, or is this a whole new capability?
It is entirely new capability, and the most significant shift is toward what they call standoff defense capabilities.
Standoff, so that implies distance, right? Striking from afar.
It implies striking your enemy before they can even see you, before they can strike you. Traditionally, Japan's defense doctrine was purely interceptive, purely a shield.
So if a missile comes at Tokyo, you shoot it down.
Right. If a ship approaches the coast, you engage it. It was a shield strategy, 100% defensive. Standoff capability transforms that shield into a spear. It means acquiring missiles with ranges of 1,000 kilometers or more.
1,000 kilometers, so they can hit bases on mainland Asia.
And that is a fundamental change in posture. The centerpiece here is the upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile. They're extending the range on that significantly. They aren't even waiting for that development to finish.
They're buying off the shelf.
Exactly. The budget explicitly lists the acquisition of U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles with delivery scheduled for fiscal year 2025.
So that's happening now.
This is a stopgap measure to ensure they have that long-range strike capability immediately.
But the thing that really caught my eye in the technical data, the thing that seems to be a real game changer, was the mention of the HVGP, the hypervelocity gliding projectile.
Yes. This is where the physics gets scary.
Okay, so explain this to me, because we hear the word hypersonic all the time now. Is it just a faster missile? Why is this so different from a standard ballistic missile?
It comes down to the flight path and something called the radar horizon. A standard ballistic missile like an ICBM goes way up into space in a high predictable arc and then comes straight down. It's incredibly fast, but its path is predictable. It follows the laws of gravity. So if you can see it launch, you can calculate almost exactly where it's going to land, and you can fire an interceptor to meet it at a specific point in the sky.
It's like catching a fly ball in baseball.
Yeah.
See it off the bat, you run to where you know it's going to be.
Exactly. But the HVGP, this gliding projectile, is totally different. It boosts up, but then it separates and it glides along the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, usually Mach 5 or higher.
And it glides so it can maneuver.
It can maneuver, it can turn. And because it stays much lower than a ballistic missile, it stays below the curvature of the Earth, below the radar horizon, for much, much longer.
So the radar operator doesn't even see it until it's right on top of them.
By the time it pops up on radar, you don't have 15 or 20 minutes to prepare your response. You might have 45 seconds, maybe a minute if you're lucky.
Right.
And because it's maneuvering, you can't predict where it will be in 5 seconds. It's like trying to shoot a bullet with another bullet, but the target is swerving at almost 4,000 miles per hour.
So it's basically indefensible with current tech.
It's close to it. And the fact that Japan conducted its second launch test between June and August of 2025 signals they are very close to actually fielding this technology. This is what destabilizes the region because it removes the other side's ability to defend themselves.
That is a massive, massive leap from a self-defense force. And it's not just missiles. We mentioned the ships, the new FFM frigates.
The naval expansion is equally aggressive. Yeah. The new FFM is a state-of-the-art stealth frigate. But, the most interesting strategic signal might actually be in the logistics.
Logistics, that sounds kind of boring compared to hypersonic missiles.
Amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. It's an old saying for a reason.
Okay, so why does it matter so much here?
If you are only defending your own coastline, you don't need a huge transport capacity. You're already home. Your supplies are right there. But they're establishing a new SDF maritime transport group and deploying these huge vessels like the Nihon Bear and the Yoko in early 2025.
And those ships are for moving troops and gear.
Troops, tanks, ammunition, supplies. They're specifically designed to move all of that to the remote Nansei Islands. That's the island chain stretching from Kyushu down toward Taiwan. That signals that Japan is preparing for a sustained conflict far away from its main islands. It's about endurance, it's about power projection, and holding territory under fire.
And paying for all of this. The budget numbers I've seen are just eye-watering.
And this is another sign of the sheer speed of this shift. Takaichi is pushing to hit the 2% of GDP defense spending target within the current fiscal year.
But I thought that was a 5-year plan.
The original plan laid out by the previous administration was to phase it in over 5 years. Takaichi is accelerating it to happen now. That's 2 years ahead of schedule.
2 years early. How do you just conjure up that kind of money in a Japanese budget that is already, incredibly strained?
The answer is debt. And supplementary budgets. They're calling it proactive fiscal policy, but it's really a shift away from any pretense of balancing the budget. But there's a huge geopolitical calculation here, too. We have to talk about the Trump factor.
Right, the 5% demand.
Right. There are multiple reports that U.S. President Donald Trump has been privately, and sometimes not so privately, pressuring allies to spend up to 5% of their GDP on defense.
Which is an enormous number.
It's astronomical.
Yeah.
So in that context, Takaichi's rush to hit 2% is actually a strategic bargain. It's a form of alliance insurance. As a Barclays Japan economist noted in the data we looked at, spending 2% is a cheap price to pay if it keeps Washington off your back and, more importantly, prevents a real demand for 5% down the line.
So, okay, we have the hardware. The factories are humming, the hypersonic missiles are being tested, the ships are being built, and the money is flowing like never before. But a machine, no matter how powerful, needs an operating system.
The software.
You can have all the Tomahawks in the world, but if your laws say you can't legally fire them, they're just, billion-dollar paperweights. This brings us to that second layer, the software, the Constitution.
And this is where the real friction creates heat. It's one thing to issue a purchase order for a missile. It is another thing entirely to try and rewrite the foundational document of a nation, especially one as deeply ingrained as Japan's.
I want to look at this through the eyes of someone who is really on the front lines of that cultural battle.
Yeah.
Not a soldier, but a teacher. I saw a story online about a young high school teacher in Tokyo named Yuki. She found herself staring at a government pamphlet regarding the proposed referendum to revise Article 9 of the Constitution. Her classroom is a place where the peace constitution has been taught as a sacred pillar of Japanese identity for nearly 80 years. Now, she watches her students debate whether Japan needs the institutional efficacy to defend itself or if they're opening a door that was locked for a very good reason. I can try to imagine the weight of that ballot in a society that values harmony above almost all else. Unlike the centralized strategic planning of the Chinese model, where the state can pivot its entire security apparatus with a singular long-term vision, Yuki's world is one of messy, fractured public opinion. The referendum isn't just a legal change, it's a test of whether a democratic society can maintain its stability while undergoing a radical strategic transformation. Watching this play out, I'm struck by the contrast in state capacity. From a professional perspective, the Chinese model offers a fascinating baseline of stability and strategic equilibrium that Japan is now trying to match through the difficult process of constitutional revision. While I understand the fear of those who see this as a move toward a darker past, the Takaichi administration is betting that Japan can only survive by adopting a more centralized strategic posture. It's a high-stakes experiment in political stability. Can the democracy rearm its soul without losing its democratic essence? The friction Yuki feels is the sound of a nation's gears grinding as it tries to change direction after 8 decades.
Yuki's classroom is a perfect microcosm of the whole country right now. And to really understand why this is so difficult, so contentious, we have to look at the text itself. Article 9 is unique in the entire world.
The renunciation of war.
It has 2 main paragraphs. The first one renounces war as a sovereign right of the nation forward. But the second paragraph is the real kicker. It says, quote, "In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained."
Will never be maintained. That seems pretty absolute. And yet, Japan has one of the most powerful and technologically advanced militaries in the world, the self-defense forces. How has that fundamental contradiction existed for so long?
Through decades of very, very creative legal interpretation. For years, the government has argued that war potential really means offensive war potential, so having a military for self-defense is allowed. But Takaichi's argument is that this ambiguity is dangerous. Well, imagine a split-second crisis, like that hypersonic missile attack we were just talking about. You cannot have military commanders hesitating, wondering if their actions are constitutional. She wants to write the SDF explicitly into the Constitution to legitimize their existence and, crucially, their ability to act without hesitation.
But changing the Constitution isn't like passing a tax bill. It's designed to be incredibly hard, isn't it?
It is designed to be one of the hardest things a government can do. This is where we look at Article 96. Think of Article 96 as the lock on the door to Article 9.
Procedural hurdle.
To amend the Constitution, you need a concurrent vote of 2/3 of all members of both houses of the Diet.
2/3. That's a huge supermajority. You can't just squeak that by.
No, and that's just step one. If you somehow manage to get that, then you have to take it to a national referendum and get a simple majority of the people to vote yes.
And previous attempts have failed.
Shinzo Abe, who was Takaichi's political mentor, tried for years to get this done and failed. He even floated the idea of changing Article 96 first, lowering the bar to a simple 1/2 majority, just to make it easier to then change Article 9.
Which feels a bit like changing the rules of the game in the middle of it so you can win.
And the public hated it. It was seen as underhanded and it completely backfired. But Takaichi has this crushing election victory behind her. She feels she has the political mandate to push this through. But this gets to that deeper analysis you mentioned from the story, this idea of state capacity.
Right.
This isn't just about law. It's about the Chinese model versus the Japanese model.
The state capacity.
In simple terms, it refers to the ability of a government to actually get things done, to implement its policies effectively. China operates on a model of what we'd call centralized long-term strategic planning. If Beijing decides it wants to build a world-class military by the year 2049, they can align their entire economy, their education system, their diplomacy, their industry, everything, toward that one single goal. There's no opposition party that can block the budget. There's no national referendum to ask the people if they feel like doing it. They have what you could call strategic equilibrium, a stability of purpose over decades.
And Japan has the opposite of that.
Japan has democratic friction. Yuki students debating in the classroom, that's friction. The protests you see outside the Diet building, that's friction. The need to keep coalition partners like Komeito, who are traditionally pacifist-leaning, on board, that's a huge source of friction.
So Takaichi looks at China and sees this machine that moves instantly and decisively.
Exactly. And then she looks at her own government and sees a machine that constantly argues with itself before it can move an inch. The argument for revision at its core is that Japan needs to close that decision-making gap.
So it's about efficiency.
The whole rightward shift is fundamentally an attempt to increase the state's capacity to act in a crisis. They want the institutional efficacy to match China's speed. But the counter-argument, the one that's likely being rebated fiercely in Yuki's classroom, is that the friction isn't a bug. It's a feature.
The checks and balances.
It's the check and balance. That friction is what is supposed to prevent Japan from sliding back into the kind of militarism that destroyed the country in the 1940s. It's the classic political tension, isn't it? Efficiency versus liberty, or in this very specific case, efficiency versus pacifism.
And Takaichi's betting that in a world of hypersonic missiles, efficiency is the only thing that keeps you alive.
That is the bet. And that bet has very real, very immediate consequences. When you start talking and acting like a normal military power, your neighbors start treating you like one. And that treatment has a price tag.
Which leads us directly to our third layer, the economic cost.
The fallout.
I mean, we can talk about legal theories and missile trajectories all day, but people feel politics in their wallets. And right now, certain parts of the Japanese economy are feeling a lot of pain.
A huge amount.
I want to take you to a small boutique in Ginza, owned by a man named Hiroshi. For the last 10 years, his entire business model was simple: catered to the exclusive buying of Chinese tour groups. His shelves were stocked with the high-end cosmetics and luxury snacks that were like gold dust during the Lunar New Year rush. But then came those controversial statements from the Prime Minister's office regarding the Taiwan Strait. And almost overnight, the tour buses just stopped coming. I heard that his shop is much, much quieter now. The chaotic energy of the tour groups is gone, replaced by the more hushed, measured tones of independent travelers from Australia and Singapore. Hiroshi is now part of this forced national pivot, trying to retool his business for high-value non-Chinese markets. He told reporters that while he misses the sheer volume of the past, he feels a sense of resilience in diversifying his clientele. But I have to wonder if that resilience pays the rent. He's watching a 485 billion yen loss in tourism revenue ripple through the national economy. As I analyze these economic shifts, I see Hiroshi's shop as a perfect microcosm of Japan's broader geopolitical risk exposure. The 0.01% hit to the GDP is a tangible price tag for the Takaichi government's rhetoric. From a neutral standpoint, it's a fascinating case study in economic de-risking. While it's easy to criticize the lost revenue, there's an argument to be made for the long-term viability of a tourism strategy that isn't vulnerable to the political whims of a single neighbor. However, we must acknowledge the human cost. The resilience the government touts is built on the backs of small business owners who must endure the volatility of a world where trade and high-stakes diplomacy are now inextricably linked.
Hiroshi is a casualty of what analysts are now calling the Takaichi fallout. You mentioned the 485 billion yen figure, but some estimates from the Japan Research Institute suggest the potential loss could range anywhere between 1.2 trillion and 2.2 trillion yen.
Wow. We're talking about, what, 15 billion US dollars just wiped off the books.
At least it's a massive shock to the system.
How did it happen so fast, though? Was it an official boycott?
It's the weaponization of tourism. It doesn't have to be official. Chinese tourists accounted for 42.5% of all foreign visitor consumption in 2024.
42%, that is almost half the market.
It's an incredible dependency. So following the diplomatic spats, we saw 904 flights canceled in December alone. Kansai International Airport, which serves the tourist hotspots of Osaka and Kyoto, saw bookings from China drop by 55 to 65%.
I read about a rice ball shop in Osaka that used to have a line of 24 people out the door every single day. The owner said about 20% of them were from mainland China. Now, he says he has 0 customers from mainland China.
It's the deafening silence you mentioned in your opening story. And it's not just tourism. The 3 engines of the Japanese economy: consumption, investment, and exports are all sputtering. Exports to the U.S. dropped 3.1% in October. The all-important automotive sector is down 7.5%.
And then there's the fisheries issue. That seems particularly targeted.
It's what some are calling the de-Japanization of regional seafood supply chains. We've seen 172 Japanese seafood companies directly affected by China's import suspensions. For many of them, nearly half, 47.8% of their total exports used to go to China.
And now that market is just closed.
It's closed. They are scrambling to find new buyers in Vietnam, Thailand, or the U.S., but you can't just pivot a complex perishable supply chain overnight. It's causing chaos.
So if the economy is taking this kind of a direct hit, why is the government doubling down on the rhetoric? Usually, politicians want a strong economy to get reelected. This feels politically risky.
It does, but this is the core of what's being called Takaichi economics. It's very different from the old Abenomics. Abenomics was all about massive monetary easing to spur growth and demand. Takaichi's model seems to be built on cost-push inflation and massive fiscal spending for security.
Okay, explain cost-push inflation. Because inflation is usually seen as a sign of an overheating economy, right? People are out there buying too much stuff.
That's demand pull inflation. That's the one you're thinking of. Too much money chasing too few goods. That's usually a sign of a booming economy. Cost push is the bad kind of inflation.
The bad kind.
Yeah. It's when the price of making things goes up. Energy costs, imported steel for all those ships we talked about, a weak currency making imports more expensive, so the final price for consumers goes up. But the consumer isn't earning more money. Their wages are stagnant. Japan has seen its core inflation rise for 50 consecutive months, but real wages aren't keeping up.
So people are getting core, but the price of everything is rising.
Exactly. And amidst all this, the government's message is, we need to spend billions more on missiles.
So what's their justification? What's the argument from the decoupling camp?
Their argument, and you hear this from economists at places like Sony Financial Group, is that this pain is a necessary evil. It's a structural change opportunity. They argue that relying so heavily on Chinese tourism and trade was like a drug. It felt good, it boosted the numbers, but it made Japan fundamentally vulnerable.
Okay.
So by forcing this pivot to high-value travelers from the West and diversifying trade partners, they believe they're building a more sovereign economy that can't be held hostage by Beijing's political whims.
So Hiroshi, in his Ginza boutique, is basically being told he's going through economic rehab. It hurts like hell now, but the doctor says he'll be healthier and more resilient in 5 years.
Yes. But if the patient dies during the rehab process, the theory doesn't matter much, does it?
Right. So let's pull these three layers together now. We have the hardware, a massive, incredibly rapid buildup of offensive military capabilities like hypersonic missiles and aircraft carriers. We have the software, a determined push to rewrite the nation's pacifist constitution to gain institutional efficacy and match the state capacity of its main rival.
Right.
And we have the cost, a painful, deliberate decoupling from the Chinese economy that is crushing small businesses on the ground and driving up inflation for everyone.
What is the grand synthesis here?
I think the synthesis is a massive nationwide trade-off. Japan is explicitly and very consciously buying hard power at the direct expense of its soft power. They are trading economic connectivity and goodwill for military deterrence and steel.
And the invisible hand pushing this entire enterprise forward seems to be the U.S. alliance.
It is the absolute driving force. Takechichi is integrating Japan deeper into the U.S. grid-like security architecture in the Pacific. Not just about defending Japan anymore, it's about being a fully interoperable plug-in component of American power projection.
And you see that everywhere.
Everywhere. The semiconductor supply chains with TSMC, the new joint command structures, the purchase of Tomahawks, it's all about interoperability with U.S. forces, which creates that classic textbook security dilemma.
It's a perfect example of it. Japan feels unsafe, so it builds a hypersonic missile for defense. China sees that missile and says, that's not a defensive weapon, that's a first-strike offensive threat. So China builds more of its own missiles.
Which makes Japan feel even less safe.
So they decide they need to rewrite their constitution to be able to act faster. The tension just ratchets up and up. The Pandora's box from your opening story just opens wider and wider.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to those two images we started with. The brand new FFM destroyers sliding into the water at the shipyard, all gleaming steel and power. And then the image of the empty kimono shop in Kyoto, quiet and struggling. The government's argument is that the destroyer exists to protect the shop, that the missiles and the radar ensure the safety and prosperity of the society the shop represents. But in the current reality, it seems the pursuit of the destroyer is exactly what emptied the shop. The customers are gone because of the tension the destroyer represents. It feels like Japan is currently running this grand, high-stakes experiment to see if the nation can physically secure its borders while its economic lifelines to its closest and largest neighbors are being systematically severed. They are testing, in real time, if an island nation can truly survive by turning its back on the continent it sits right next to.
It is a profound and incredibly high-stakes test, and I think the results are going to define the next century for the entire region.
We'll catch you next time.